Welcome back to a new episode of Let's Talk About Star Wars with Maggie Lovett. Today's episode is going to be filled with spoilers, so if you have not seen the 13th chapter of The Mandalorian, stop now. I don't want to spoil this for you. If you have somehow managed to avoid being spoiled for chapter 13, good on you, but please get off the internet until you are able to watch the episode. I do not want to be the reason why somebody is spoiled. But I could not resist discussing this week's episode. So much happened in it, and I mean, Grogu has a name. Finally, after 13 episodes, we know the child's traumatic backstory as well as his name, and I don't think things are going to be the same from here on out. And once we knew his name, the great debate in fandom began over whether or not people liked the name. Most people had not come up with names for the child, like myself. I never theorized what his name may have been. I personally thought he was going to remain the child for a lot longer, but I'm really happy that we got a name for him. But I know that a lot of people had come up with like headcanon names for him, and unfortunately they were never going to be happy with any name that was chosen for him. I also know a lot of people had considered that they would follow the same alliteration with Yoda and Yaddle's name, and I'm actually happy that they deviated from that. It's Grogu. Why Grogu? We may never know, or we might find out during the Mandalorian Gallery episodes, which start on December 25th. We might find out why they chose Grogu. We do know that Grogu's name was decided sometime when they started working on The Mandalorian, so it's not like they just came up with it last week. I have fingers crossed, hope that Grogu's name was created by George. I could see John and Dave being like, hey, we need a name, and George being like, Grogu. But I'm really excited to learn, hopefully, where his name came from. I tried to do some research on my own, and all I was able to pull up was 2 records on Ancestry for somebody whose last name was Grogu in Los Angeles in the 1920s. But upon further investigation, their last name was Grogan, and somebody had typed it in wrong into Ancestry, so disappointment. But I couldn't find any like origins for the name. I tried to go really deep and be like, let's look at the root of the name. And to be honest, I think that we often give Star Wars a little too much credit. It's goofy, it's fun, it's not super deep. Sure, they cover some like really weighty topics, but this isn't a network primetime drama. There's not going to be a lot of consideration put into things. And I don't think names are as deep as we would like them to be. Like, there's no doubt that there are some names that carry weight with them and have intent behind their inception. But this is also the same franchise that gave us Jar Jar Binks and Deadbolt and Sleaze Bagano and Salacious B. Crumb and Droopy McCool. I'm not considering a work of masterpiece from Star Wars and naming. Sure, there's a lot of symbolism and mythology in the franchise, but most of the name choices are pulled from Greek mythology and Arabic mythology. There's a lot of names that are derived from the Bible, from Sanskrit, and so many other languages like even Hebrew. And a lot of the names are just random names that George Lucas was like, yeah, that's cool, let's go with that. So today's episode, I'm going to be talking a little bit about names and some of their origins. It's very surface level. I'm not going super deep into it because I don't personally think there's a lot of like secret hidden meaning behind the names. But it is interesting, and it, with the naming of Grogu, I think it is interesting to look at, what's in a name. The thing with names in Star Wars is that some of them can be incredibly simple. For instance, in Solo, we learned the meaning behind Han Solo's name, which is that he was literally Solo. And then you have R2-D2, which came about from the abbreviation for Reel to Dialogue Track 2, which George Lucas heard during American Graffiti, and he just filed that away to use in a script. Yoda is an interesting one because I saw a lot of people talking about like, why wasn't it a name like Yoda? And like saying that Grogu is like a really weird, unusual name. But the thing is, Yoda is not a normal name either. Yoda is only normal because we have heard it for our entire life. For some of us, I'm 27, almost 28, so Yoda's name has existed in pop culture for almost twice my current life. For others, they were young when they first heard Yoda, and it's easy for names like that to become a part of culture. So we're used to it because we hear it all the time, but Yoda is not a normal name. When I was doing some research for this, I found that Yoda potentially actually came from Hebrew. There's a phrase, Ikadmi Yodea, which means he who knows, which seems like it probably fits Yoda's entire kind of ethos. So I thought that was interesting, but the thing is with Star Wars names is that George Lucas has never really been upfront about where he got names. Like Anakin, for instance, there was the story from Ken Anakin, who he believed that the name for Anakin came from his surname, and that Alec Guinness had seen it while working at Pinewood and had suggested it for Anakin's name and just dropped the extra N. And this was Ken Anakin himself saying this. But then after Ken Anakin died in 2009, George Lucas was like, yeah, that wasn't true. That's not where I got the name. Which I kind of believe George because the last name already existed in one of his early scripts for A New Hope. It was just spelled differently. But George has never revealed the origin for Anakin's name. And there are Anakims and Anakins spelled differently throughout different mythology sources. So it's possible he just saw the name somewhere along the way and was like, oh, that's cool, I'll use that someday. I mean, that's how a lot of writers come up with names for their characters. Like myself, for instance, I will sometimes be really on the nose and I'll find a name that means whatever this character symbolizes. But in other instances, I'll like drive through a cemetery and be like, Craven, that's a cool last name. I'm going to use that in a book someday. There's a lot of additional weight added to names that is sometimes not there. I think that English classes have definitely made a lot of us more in tune with trying to find the hidden meaning in things, and sometimes there's just no meaning. Padme's name comes from Padma, which is the Sanskrit word for lotus. Obi-Wan Kenobi is rooted in Japanese culture and words. I mean, Obi is part of a Japanese ensemble, and we know that George Lucas was very interested in Japanese history and Japanese cinema, so it makes sense that some of these names are just borrowed from cultures that he was interested in and had been exposed to. Just even thinking recently on The Mandalorian, we had Dr. Mandible, which was a giant alien ant, in an episode directed by the director of Ant-Man. And as we know, ants have those pincher things, which are their mandibles. So some of them are just on the nose and like cheeky allusions to what the character is. I mean, going back to Death Sticks in the prequel trilogy, Sleazebagano, Sleazebag. It's so on the nose sometimes. And that's the fun part of Star Wars. It's goofy. The names are absolutely ridiculous. One name that I do think is really interesting is Ezra Bridger from Rebels. His name, Ezra, means helper, and then bridge, obviously, Bridger, bridging. His character was really created as a way to bridge the prequel trilogy into the original trilogy, helping to bridge Ezra Bridger. I mean, it's there. It's just the way these names come about. Grogu probably has absolutely no hidden meaning to it. I will say that at a later date, probably once The Mandalorian is over, I want to do a deep dive into Ben Solo's name, because I think the way that they created Kylo Ren was a very interesting kind of code name for him, because it's very visually similar to his birth name. And so it's an interesting play and a dichotomy between the two and how it's used. So I mean, there's definitely times that Star Wars goes there with names, but most of the time it's Yoda and Yaddle and Jar Jar Binks and Grogu. And with that, Grogu and I have come to the end of this week's episode. Before I leave you, I do want to talk about two things. So I have just finished Tales from Galaxy's Edge. I got an Oculus Quest earlier this year, and I was so happy that I got it because I was able to play this game. So I had a lot of issues with Vader Immortal. I did not realize I would get quite as motion sick as I ultimately did. I believe my mom found me laying on the bed like totally spaced out because it was so overwhelming. So the nice part of Tales from Galaxy's Edge is that there are two modes. You can play it either standing up or sitting down, which is great for accessibility and for people who may have mobility issues. They are still able to play the game. They also have a bunch of different toggle features to help you be more comfortable. I played it for I think 2.5 hours one day and didn't get a lick of motion sickness. It also does some nice things where you can blink when you jump up, when you hover, so that you don't feel like you're actually hovering above the ground and it doesn't trigger motion sickness. So it's been really fun to play it. The story is really interesting. The High Republic, I have so many questions about Addie and I cannot wait to learn more. I'm really excited for how they're going to expand stuff in the game because there are going to be add-ons in the future. It was just so much fun. I really wanted to explore Batuu, so I'm really hoping there is an expansion pack at some point that you can purchase and explore more of Batuu because I miss my home away from home. My only problem with Tales from Galaxy's Edge is how much they hate porgs. I'm sorry, but I am not going to kill porgs. I felt really bad about destroying their nests as well. I mean, if you don't know me, I really love porgs. Do you see this? I really love porgs. So injuring porgs and treating them poorly is just not for me. Not here for that. So that was my one complaint. It's a bit like playing fantasy games where they tell me I have to kill wolves, and I'm like, do I though? They can eat me. It's fine. But there's a lot of fun things. I do not remember the name of the guy in the cantina, but his Palpatine theory was hilarious, and I died laughing. But there's just a lot of fun things about Tales from Galaxy's Edge. So if you are able to get an Oculus, play this game. It's so worth it. Industrial Lights and Magic, which I will sing their songs forever, really hit it out of the park with this game, and I was just so relieved to see a game that was designed around accessibility and trying to make it more comfortable for the user because not everybody can do virtual reality, and not everybody is able to get up and like move around consistently to play the game, and it was just so much fun. There was like a few little sometimes if you drop your blaster, you can't pick it back up again. It just vanishes. So there's like little bugs, but that's to be expected in a newly released game. And they keep updating it. There's new patches constantly to fix some of the issues. But seriously, this game is amazing and I want more. I want more. So that was my big thing that I did this week. I finished the game in 2.5 days. Super sad. And then I also wanted to talk about this poster I got for Prospect. Not Star Wars, but it is Star Wars adjacent. Pedro Pascal is in this movie. It is currently on Netflix. It came out in 2018. I will link down below the interview I did with Zeke Earl, who was the writer and director for the film. Super interesting, super great movie. Honestly, probably one of my top 5 sci-fi films. Super intelligently done. It doesn't over-explain things. I tend to find that sci-fi can either be really good or really bad. Sometimes sci-fi goes to an extreme length to make the audience feel stupid for not knowing things and will over-explain things. But Prospect is handled in such a way that new concepts are very delicately presented and not over-explained, but there's enough context that you understand. Super good super good movie. It's like an hour and a half long, and it's on Netflix. So everybody has Netflix. Everybody should watch it, and everyone should read my interview with the writer and director Zeke Earl. I'm super excited about it being on Netflix, and I've already watched it 3 times. It was on Hulu before, and I watched it an embarrassing number of times. But I am here to tell you, if you like Star Wars, you should watch it. It's super good. And I like to joke that that was the film that made Lucasfilm decide to hire Pedro to play Din Djarin. So you should definitely watch it. But with that, I have nothing else to talk about. I have had no toy orders come in. I've been very good. I might have bought some new t-shirts, which you'll be seeing soon, because that is my new guilty pleasure. But with that, Grogu and I say, may the Force be with you.